everybody online. It's lovely to be here at the SU South African Summit online today and engaging in what no doubt is going to be such an exciting conversation around the next wave of mobility. My name is Kelly Nuttall. I'm an SU faculty member from Australia, and I'm focused on AI and the future of mobility. So it's no surprise this topic is very close to my heart. And this topic's always a really popular one at SU events. And today we have two amazing panelists who I am super excited to be talking to. Two names that I will almost certainly mispronounce in my Australian accent. So firstly, we have Carlo van der Veer, is that right?
No, that's very close. Thank you. That's impressive.
Carlo, so you can introduce how you would say your name, but if you would just give everyone a quick introduction to yourself, that would be wonderful.
Okay, Carlo van der Veer. I worked in the automotive industry actually for most of my life. Most of that in the navigation area, most of that at TomTom, the navigation company. The last 10 years, I combined that by working at the University of Eindhoven, where I'm responsible for all the mobility research. And the last 3 years of that, I'm also leading an AI institute over there. And I'm trying to combine all of that. But it gave me a little bit of view on the mobility. I'm also publishing in the national newspaper on the future of mobility and consulting a lot of governments and industries on where it's heading.
Wow, it's about like 10 people's careers right there in one. And our second panelist, Andre de Leon, is that right?
Yeah, very good. Andres de Leon.
Okay.
You have good pronunciation.
Oh, it's because I type it out phonetically, so I don't make any mistakes where possible. But yeah, would you mind giving everybody on the call a quick introduction on yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm Andres de Leon. I'm the CEO of Hyperloop Transportation Technologies, Hyperloop TT. I've been with the company for more than 7 years. Previously, I was the CEO, and I became CEO 2 years ago. Before than that, I have had a professional career working in different industries around the world, in different countries, US, Spain, Belgium, France, Italy, South America. I've been moving quite a lot. I started my career in the construction business, and then I went to industrial business, managing industrial corporations. And then more than a decade ago, I started my own venture. And then 7 years ago, I was kind of attracted by the concept of Hyperloop TT. And I was one of the first contributors there and working from there, the last years in trying to develop this concept.
Awesome. Wow, amazing experience on the panel here. So let's start with the first question, which is really around what developments have been made in the mobility sector in the last few years, and what are you most excited about? Start with Carlo.
Yeah, that's a good and wide question, but actually I would summarize one of the most interesting things that's happening at this moment is that you see that mainly due to technology, you see that mobility is really heading to an almost implicit safe and I think also a sustainable system. So, we had mobility. It brought a lot of prosperity and happiness and freedom to people. The only thing is that it's at this moment not a sustainable system. A lot of people die and get injured in mobility. That's the biggest problem. We pollute, makes fossil fuel dependency and all this kind of stuff. Now, actually what you see in the last decades is that we're really, really making progress towards an inherently sustainable kind of mobility. And that's something that really gives a lot of extra quality of mobility.
Andre, what about you?
Well, I really think that my colleague has summarized very well what are the challenges and where we come from. No? We have been facing during, I'd say, the last century, a mobility system that has gone increasingly growth, but without taking in consideration sustainability, without taking in consideration also the passenger journey, the passenger experience, So, and also I would say that it's a system a little bit overloaded. Right now we have congestion, traffic, pollution, people dying. So I think that the main point today is to solve, that the need of new modes of transportation that really can move people in a more safe, in a more efficient, and definitely in a more sustainable mode. And I think that we are moving towards that, but there is still a lot to be done.
Yeah, and I would say that these are still challenges we're seeing in developed countries, but even more challenging in developing countries. So what do developing countries need to be thinking about to tackle some of these and catch up? Who's got to be on that? Do you want to start with that, Andre?
Well, okay. So look, I think that the main problem I think that in the developing countries, on one hand, we have a problem, but on the other hand, we have an opportunity. No, we really need to change a lot of the basics, to arrive to be able to provide the new modes of mobility. But on the other hand, the fact that we don't have that infrastructure open a completely green field of opportunities. No, we don't have to fight against legacy transportation systems, and industries that are fighting against these changes in some cases. So I'd say that it's a mix. No, so for instance, when we talk about the Hyperloop, definitely will be easier to develop the Hyperloop in places where the high-speed rail has not been developed than in areas where high-speed rail has been developed. There is a legacy transportation industry, and they don't want to move into the change. No. So yeah, definitely we need to set up the basics, but we have a huge opportunity to set up the basis properly done from the beginning, and that's how I see it.
So it's a really valid point. What do you think, Carlo?
Yeah, I specifically think there's a big chance for developing countries because there's a lot of things where you can leapfrog on. So just skip certain phases that in developed countries already have been done and are mostly very expensive. But yeah, just as developing countries skipped the landlines to go immediately to mobile telephone, also mobility, there's a lot of leapfrog potential. If you can see now that, for instance, the total electrification of transport, which is happening now and which goes much faster than everybody expected, not so much because it's cleaner, that's an interesting thing. So an electric car or also an electric two-wheeler has a huge potential to make everything much cleaner. But the thing is, it's also cheaper. And with distributed power generation, etc., and for smart charging, you can even have less load on your energy system than before. And there's all kind of smartness that's being developed now, but that can lead to a better, easy implementable system of mobility. So electrification is something where you can leapfrog on. And the other thing is how you build your infrastructure also for normal traffic for two-wheelers, so on a local scale. You can also see that, for instance, I always say that smart mobility is smart cars on a not too smart infrastructure. So all this technology on clever infrastructure with variable message signs and difficult traffic light, all this kind of stuff, might not be necessary in the future. So this is just two examples on where developing countries can leapfrog to a better system, because it will lead to a better and cheaper system in mobility. You can skip a lot that has been gone wrong in the developed country and developed world for developing countries.
So what you raise is a really interesting conversation though, because it talks to, I guess, the intersection of energy and transport. And are you seeing, I guess, these sectors and industries working collaboratively together as we move towards this more sustainable future, or is that an opportunity? I might start with you then, Carlo.
Yeah, that certainly is the opportunity, but the mobility is always a very different cooperation between the industry and the governments. But if you look bottom, actually people are mobility by definition. You should also not forget that. If people cannot be mobile, they're going to be unhappy. It's a purpose on its own. It's not only a thing to get from A to B. That's a strange thing that happened somewhere in evolution, that we are for 1 hour and 50 minutes is rather predictable. We want to be mobile. And that's actually, if you come back to the government, it's just to facilitate that people can be mobile and that you also run an economy on that. But then can you reach your work, etc., as far as is necessary. We know also now how to work on distance, but that's a thing where you should look for this cooperation. But then it should be bottom line that this should be as sustainable as possible, because, as we said already a few times now, mobility is at this moment far from sustainable. And you should prevent that, especially in developing countries where you can expect that people are going to be faster and faster and traveling more and more. Better do it right in the first time. I just mentioned some of the technologies like electrification, like safe mobility, but certain high-speed, efficient transport like Hyperloop is another option for that.
Yeah, Andre, what do you see in your space in terms of, I guess, convergence of energy and mobility sector working together?
Well, we thought like that from the beginning. It's in our DNA because we have a system that put solar panels on top and we generate more energy that we consume. So for us this was and of course all the energy that we generate is renewable energy. So for us from the beginning was part of our mission, to develop a mobility system that also is capable to again generate more energy than consume and don't use resources that are not needed, no? and also taking advantage that if you have a big right of way, you are gonna need to that. So I think that when you think, what I would like to say is that in general, I think that it's not only about electrification, but about also how do we use, the less energy possible to mobilize people. That's an important part of the equation that people need to understand too. It's not only about reducing utilization of fossil fuels. Of course, that's really important. But it's also about how do you do it in the smartest way to use as less energy as possible to mobilize people.
Yeah, that's I think to Carlo's point, don't forget this is about people, not, the means. So let's talk about mobility as a service. Like I, work with a lot of different organisations. Everyone's talking about it as an opportunity. Can you unpack mobility as a service for our audience and give us your top 3 predictions for that opportunity around mobility as a service? And what are your predictions that you think is going to play out in the next couple of years? I'll start with you, Andre.
Well, I think that definitely mobility as a service has come to stay. I think that young generations, they don't need to own the vehicle. What they need is to have the service, and to use it as they need it. Okay. That being said, I think that also we have a long way to go through to arrive to the levels that we really need. When we think in mobility as a service, I think that we need also to separate what are we talking about mass transportation and about individual transportation and all of that. So for me, the biggest challenge definitely are in regulation. I think that the regulatory environment I think that there is an effort to move, on the regulatory environment at the same speed that the technology, but definitely we are not there yet. Okay. And second is about how do we prepare our existing infrastructure for this new future. There is a lot of areas that a lot of things that we are not gonna need, like parkings and things like that, but there is also a lot of other things that we are going to need. So we need to restructure our cities, we need to restructure our environment, to make this change much more radical and much more exponential than it is today.
What about you, Carlo? What do you think about mobility as a service? What are your big predictions?
I agree partly with Anders that it's going to be here to stay, but I'm a little bit less optimistic, also based on the fact that we hear about it now. Ever since we have the smartphone, we hear about the mobility as a service totally replacing mobility. And I think there will be a spot for mobility as a service, but it's not going to take a very large portion of the total miles driven. And that's because we're waiting for the breakthrough of mobility as a service already now for a decade, and people get a little bit tired of all the promises because there's still not a real breakthrough option. Although you can also say, if you see a mobility as a service, if you Google Maps and you plan on the different modalities, there's just one button you miss to also pay for it and have your ticket, and then that's what mobility service would be about. But the big shift is that people would replace their car with mobility as a service, as a lot of people hope that young people will not want to own a vehicle. That so far hasn't come out really. It even also research shows that most youth still want to have a car or their own bike, etc. And the thing is that also in practice, that's why I think the breakthrough of mobility service hasn't been there yet. it is that it's also more expensive because there's a fundamental problems to keep the vehicles clean and to keep them also in one piece. They break down kind of fast because people are not so careful with a shared vehicle than with their own vehicles, which in the end, because also you have to keep it clean and in one piece, it makes it also kind of expensive. And especially, which is a concern of me, because we have a room problem probably, is that also part of because of electrification, but also because other trends, you see that actually cars and also bikes and two-wheelers, they go down in price in the near future. So they might be too cheap to share. And people kind of are linked to ownership of vehicles much more than we expected. They see it as the moving part of their house, the extension of their cave. And that's something that goes very deep into your instincts and might not so easy swappable by a mobility as a service. So I'm a little bit more pessimistic, but let's hope that it will come up there. But it's actually because all the other stuff, because of innovation, is so good that mobility as a service might not be the better option to choose from in the future. We are just innovating too good with all our vehicles at this moment.
Oh, I love that. Two very different perspectives, which is, reflective of the world.
Slightly different. It will be there.
No. Not so different.
It's a very interesting margin. Yeah.
Not so different at the end, because I'm agree with him. I was saying we have a long path to go, and the promise. And I think that there has been some overpromise in the market on this. So I'm agree. Yeah. I'm a little bit more optimistic about that the new generations, really, because I see it in my kids, okay? They don't care too much about having a car anymore. When I was 18, my biggest dream was to have a car, no? And they don't care about it, no? But it's true that I'm agree with my colleague that there is still a long job to be done and a lot of change of mentality, to arrive to that.
I mean, it's a great concept, but it's like, what are the building blocks that have to be true for people to see that it's viable and real, right? And so,
you often maybe shorten that. We often heard the difference where, we don't own music anymore. We share it on Spotify. But actually, when I went from CDs to Spotify, I certainly had my library of music exploded. I have all the music now, and I can find a song in 7 seconds. And with my CDs, I have a limited amount of music, and it always took me minutes before I found this CD, which never is in alphabetic order. So the service also improved. And with, for instance, moving from your own car to shared car, with your own car, it's 7 seconds access, and with a shared car, you have to wait maybe, or you have to walk, and that's the thing. And I do not really think that people are going to take a step back in quality of service, and that's the big challenge of mobility as a service. But I see a lot of room in improvement, and it might be still a niche, but it's a very, very interesting niche, and it brings a lot of quality to cities. So there will be certainly interesting business around there.
Yeah, and definitely, I think a role for things like artificial intelligence to improve that quality, which is what I get really excited about. We have a few minutes left, so I could jump into AI, but I think I'm going to jump more into the fads around drones and autonomous vehicles. What's the next wave of mobility that we want to be talking about at this conference that people might not be thinking about yet and should start thinking about? Or is it still very much around those things?
I see two things. I'll keep it short, but I think two-wheelers is exploding now around the world because they're electrified, cheaper, easier, and they're very sustainable. So electric two-wheelers, also bikes, Yeah. And the other thing is what I see happening, and also especially for emerging countries, is electric flying. Now, electric flying will not replace Boeings, etc. So they will not replace jet engines, but they will have small, very flexible systems. They need a small airport, maybe 20 people, etc. And there will be more also during the summit on electric flying. And I think that might be leading to a new kind of system connecting new worlds very fastly. So that's an exciting thing for my part.
That's awesome. All right. I think we are going to wrap it there. Thank you, guys. That was very, very exciting. And I think we can close it there. Thanks for your time, and we'll talk to you both soon, no doubt.
Okay.
Thank you very much.